why you see the change curve in the US so far down the life cycle.
Right.
And unfortunately, when those changes cost the most.
Well, when we get hired to do lean enterprise transformation and we're doing Kaizen and continuous, it's all that's great. But working to create an effective system after, from a broken system is much harder than creating a good system from the very beginnings.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
The knowledge management is the problem, right? So you have all these really smart engineers. And we came home from an event once and our boss says to me, "Why does General Dynamics hire you? They got the best engineers in the world. Look at you." And I'm just like, well, thanks, but I think that outside agitation gets the communication going. And in those programs, you guys were matrix managed. You're matrix managed. And I think sometimes it was all kinds of different pulls and plays on that stuff. So as, an agitator, which you certainly were an agitator, what was the hardest thing politically to navigate when trying to get people to realize this? Because you're like, invest up front, and they're like, no, we're on budget, and you're trying to spend more up front to save more long term. So it's like you're a heretic. How did you deal with that?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you an example. What's really started my interest in concurrent engineering, I was going through the ASU stuff. I wrote a big, nice paper. I had my professors come with me to talk to 120 program managers and say, you need to look at these early phases, this life cycle activity, and its influence on your program, your total program performance. And you guys are blowing through it. And I told them all pretty much the baby's ugly and you don't know what the hell you're doing, basically. But here's the way to do it, and here's the right way to do it. So afterwards, gentleman Erling R., he was a VP of engineering. They were clapping, okay, got it. And you showed all the statistics and why and how it can be done. And he comes up to me and he says, I've got a program I want you to run. And I'm like, well, I'm really more into just getting on the podium and telling how screwed up you guys are. I'm not really into that. And he goes, you know what? These two professors can say that, but you work for me. And here's your new program. Because it was going to lose millions, right?
Right.
And so we went in and how hard it was to tell the customer, restricted customer, I said, dude, the bill of material on this thing alone as it is more than the program value. That's just the bill of material for the parts, let alone the design work we have to do and the testing and all that, right? So I pulled it back. I took $400K out of the budget, downstream budget, and pulled that thing back into the development. And that, and the chief engineers in the company, everybody's like, WTF, big time. What are you talking? So, and the big Scotty M, the top program manager, said, great. Now we're going to lose the millions and another $400K thanks to this bozo. And I told my section manager, I'm not taking this program unless we can do that.
Right.
And he said, okay. So this unit had 3 printed wiring boards and a large ASIC. True story. An ASIC is an application-specific IC. They took a legacy design and they were just trying to manipulate it. Again, way down the life cycle, can I get it done?
Right.
And I said, no, we got to throw half of that away and do it over again. We went from 3 boards to 1 board because we did double-sided. Okay, we went to mostly surface mount, but the guy with the doing the ASIC was $1 million ASIC development. And he said, wait a minute, am I to understand I've got more room on the board? And I said, yeah. He goes, well, I can do this with 4 ACT 240 devices and I could be done in a week and off your program. I said, what? He goes, yeah. I said, his name was Parker. Parker, would you come with me? We walked into my section manager's office. He was busy. I said, I don't care. Shut the door. I said, Parker, you tell him what you just told me. He goes, well, when they went to 1 board and it was a bigger board and all that, I had more room. The only reason I did it ASIC is you only gave me that much room to put my functionality in, so I had to go with an ASIC. He said, so I'm going to do 4 ACT 240s, and I'm going to update the schematic tomorrow, and I'm off Mike's program on Friday, and you could put $1 million back in the coffer.
Unbelievable.
And he walked out the door, and John looked to me, and he goes, you got to be kidding me. And I said, that was one change. We made so many, but that one change paid for that 400K. Okay. And so the team at the end of the program, including the customer, thanked me for teaching them concurrent engineering. But you get a feel once you get the taste of that, and once you've been there and see it work. And you guys know this too, with all the lean elements and stuff. Nobody can value stream mapping as a tool, for example. Nobody can tell you that that's not a valuable tool. Nobody can say, oh no. don't use that because we've used it and we tried it, it's not working. No, I have seen this work. It's a religion to me at this point. These
It
tools
is.
work. You can never convince me that it's not going to work.
Absolutely.
And that's the curse that you guys have, by the way. It's a curse. You can lie to yourself, you can cheat, you can tell a company they're great, but at the end of the day, I know you walk out going, damn, that's FUBARD. That's FUBARD, and I don't want to tell the guy, but he needs a lot more work than this.
The more FUBAR, the better.
Mike, sometimes, I was listening to you go on and on and on like you were just now, but
Johnny, he's our. Go for it, Mike. He took the gloves off. Let him have it. Let him have it.
Anyway, sometimes I got to admit though that sometimes we're just lucky, and I think one of the luckiest times that I can recall being on a program with you was you guys were really up against it, and we didn't know. Exactly what we're going to do. We started off just trying to get a value stream map going. And there was not just you folks, but it was your customers and some of your suppliers all in the room at the same time. And everybody had contractual language that they were trying to achieve. And there was a couple of milestones that people kept talking about missing. And so I immediately stopped the whole facilitation. I said, listen, I think I'm onto something. I don't know. I want each one of you to just go to a different part of the room and write down what you think is involved in that milestone. And then they all went and they all thought contractually it means this, 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 and this. And then when they all came back together, none of them matched.
Right.
And
was that the heart of the matter?
That was the heart of the matter. And then that turned into a completely different session where, okay, now we can all admit that the reason we're behind is we didn't really understand what our true milestones were. Now we can get to concurrence on that. And now that we have concurrence, how do we make up all this time? And really the biggest issue that we just dealt with is get rid of all the handoffs. Instead of saying, yes, achieve this milestone and let's hand it from group to group to group until it takes 2 months to come back around, let's all meet at the same time and concur that we have in fact achieved these milestones. And what did that say to you, Mike? That put you guys completely back on track, didn't it?
Well, I remember, if I can, you get me excited here, John, because that's everything you said is how it happened. I go back to not to give it away, but just the starting exercise you guys do with the tennis balls. Here, we're going to pass them around. Everyone's like, all right, whatever. And you go, okay, you did it in 30 seconds. I've seen teams do it in 10. No way. So we get it down to 20 seconds and they're throwing it and they're trying to hand off. And you go, okay, now I'll be honest with you. I've seen a team do it in 1 second. There's no freaking way that it can go through everybody's hands in 1 second. Absolutely no way. So guess what? I'll give it away. Everyone holds their hands like that. It makes a tube. You drop the ball from the start down to the bottom. It passed every hand in the sequence you defined. And it fell out the bottom, and it took less than a second. And people go, oh, well, if that's what you mean, and we go, that's what we mean. So in your context on that example, do you remember us hovering around the phone? We had the Air Force.
That's correct.
Our direct prime customer. We had 2 or 3 suppliers, and they were trying to approve source control drawings, we call them. It's kind of like you with the Japanese model that said, we got this drawing, we had to build it. That's a source control drawing. Mm-hmm. Then you called back to the designers and said, we need to make a change, right? Well, John's right. It goes handoff. That was a 3-month process. We were 4 months behind on the program. We said, okay, tennis ball example. You guys get yourself some plane tickets. You got 15 of these source control drawings across 15 suppliers. I need an Air Force rep. I need a Navy rep. I need a customer rep. I need a this rep. And I need you all in these buildings for at least 2 days at a time.
That's right.
And it's going to take 2 months, and you're going to tell your wife you're not going to be there in 2 months for 2 months. And the customer top said, wow, that might work. And you don't leave that supplier facility until you all agree. None of this handoff rework loop, because Dennis, you asked them too, what is the yield on your first source control drawing when it gets to
Right.
the next level. Oh,
Right.
yield, huh? Why are you asking yield? Well, because it's a handoff. I just want to know. And the guys all argue and they go, about 20%.
Yeah.
You go, okay, that's the first handoff is
Right.
20% accurate.
You're never
You
going to make it.
compound, you're
Yeah.
not going to make it. You compound that with 5 or 6 handoffs, you're dead. And that's
Yeah.
the problem the program had. So get
Yeah.
all 6 of those handoffs in the same room, guys. They did it in 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
That's, by the way, that's missing a launch window on the program we were talking. We would
Right.
have.
Would have
Okay.
missed the launch window.
Would have missed it. It beat the crap out of them, but that team all got together. They started learning each other from the government, from the customer, from the this. When they went to each of the suppliers, after a while, they all had a very common knowledge of what the requirements were.
That's right. And they
And
were
they
an
listened to
integrated team.
They integrated and made changes right there in the supplier's facility, so it was producible when they left. And
That's right.
guys, we get held back. That was a $9 million 3-month savings to the program.
Yeah, those things are no joke. And when we
Yeah.
talk about supplier development and supply chain integration, this is the example that I think of. I mean, there's all kinds of very practical business school stuff that people do, but this was really roll up your sleeves and dig in hard into contracts and negotiate what is the best future for this thing. And that
Yeah.
supplier development and supply chain integration, then I think it's more than likely, I got to believe it set a precedent, like you mentioned, right? They then knew what to do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
on subsequent programs, that style rubs off on
That's it.
people. They're never going to go
Exactly.
back.
That's had so many other ancillary benefits. I got to bounce around to another genius move you guys made in a value stream effort on the Coast Guard job we were running.
Mhm.
And it was a factory floor issue and so forth. And we looked at lead times on materials, pretty basic stuff, right? And we
Mhm.
found out that this one supplier was having a hard time meeting demand, and it was one of the fundamental building blocks of the units that we needed to get out. That was 13 days from land to sea, if you remember that.
13.3 to land to sea. That's right.
13.3 from land to sea, and it
That's
was a
right.
2.5-month job, and we got it down by the time you guys left to 13 days.
13 and a third days.
13 and a third day.
But
So
the
13
answer
and third was the tack time for those of you that were wondering. We had a tack
Yeah.
time for these units, and it was 13.3 days. And we hit it nuts on, right?
You hit it. They hit it for the rest of the 270 units. So if you move those 270 to a 2-month lead time, that's years in delay.
Years,
So by the way,
years.
when you went down to auger down right there in the meeting, tell me what's the biggest problem with this supplier? You, material guy, go tell me. He comes in, he says, this is true story. He says, the biggest thing is they got the units all right, but their enclosure supplier is always late. He's the sheet metal guy. And the guy at the back of the room, again, chewing on the toothpick, goes, wait a minute. The very first thing we do when we get those units is we take them out of the enclosure and throw the enclosure in the back behind the building. Because it's not compatible with our rack system.
Right.
And the program manager's in the other corner going, what? He goes,
Right.
yeah, we wait 2 weeks extra for the enclosure. And he goes, look in the back. There's 100 of them stacked on top of each other.
You know,
And then they
those
got with
things.
the supplier, and he said, I'll drop the price by $300 or $400 if you'd make it so I don't have to build an enclosure. But I mean, those are the kind of things, Dennis, that if you aren't talking and doing what you guys are doing, you're not getting those 4 people in the room.
Well, even more specifically to your point about concurrent engineering is if they had integrated up front and invested in doing all of those things that it would require, then maybe they would have caught that and they wouldn't have lost all of the opportunity that they did up to that point.
That's a true statement.
Yeah.
No argument
So-
there at all. Exactly.
From that point, when it's about 2008 when you put John and I heavy into the, let's call it the innovation lane, with some of the project work we've done. He and I have used the Kano model and the diffusion of innovation and in all kinds of other programs to the point where we're still doing it today. Like I mentioned, I've got 6 clients right now doing this with the Goodwill. And in 4 of the 6 instances, we've had aha moments because of the investment up front. When people were already jumping to conclusions, we kept reining them back and reining them back and reining them back. And then we're, getting into conversations deeper is, like you said, it takes patience. It's something that a lot of people don't have right now. So, it's difficult to try to get people to, invest and slow down because everyone's going so fast. I don't know how you see it.
Hmm. I do see it. I being in the government world too, and we'll talk about this as a whole nother session we need to have about the way the procurement machine works within the government to commercials or to private company solicitations. The government
Mhm.
only allows you so much money that they'll reimburse you for those early, what we call proposal development. In other words, it's not even the design of the system in a sense, not detailed design, but it's the concept and the proposal. Just a quick example, some of them, they'll only fund 5 or 6 people for 2 or 3 months on something that you can bill them back for. Everything else is going to come out of the company's pocket, right, to
Right,
win the
right,
job.
right.
So by definition, and this is the big argument I had with a bunch of defense people online, a bunch of defense procurement people online in this national meeting we were on.
That's a good idea to get in fights online.
It's not, it wasn't, I was just, well, I
I'm fucking with you, dude.
I was protected by the phone in my own office,
Right,
100
right,
miles
right,
away from the
right.
closest guy. So I said, listen, the way we do it in the military procurement or the government procurement is we almost force them to get in a small room and come up with a feasible enough design that will give them the job. So
Right.
you got to have it work, and you got to have it weigh the same and be the same and go this high and do this and do that. But the funny thing is, it's a 5-person team that's doing it almost on the side sometimes just to get the proposal. And then the real problem is I hate to say this, but then I've been on the teams that have won the job. They're all happy. They go sit in the room on day one and they show up the module and they show up the design and this is it. This is what we're going to build. And I'm like, wait a minute. When we won that, we got that to win the job. But again, it's one of those jobs where the bill of material was more than the program value, right?
Right,
You're like,
right.
it's not.
It's dead in the
It's
water
not.
before it goes. Yeah.
It's dead in the water before it goes, and the government's pushing that because they don't have the patience or trust the supply chain base to do the right things in that innovative environment. Until you set up, do you remember the Hope Diamond?
Of course I do.
Perfect example. We're not going to approve those sites, those remote sites, until you've done this, this, and this, right? So they didn't have
gates, right? Not dates.
Those were gates, not dates, right? And so they had what they thought was the controls. They don't trust you to design it correctly and all that until we see it, right? The
Right.
problem is when they finally approved it 3 months later, that tower no longer had a lease available. The Indian reservation, that other's on an Indian reservation and you can't build it. And by the way, that looks like water, but it's not, that kind of thing. So by the time they actually approved it, 3/4 of that design changed.
Mhm.
And why?
Right.
Because they didn't trust them in those early phases, Dennis. And until we proved that we've got the right team and they had some trust on our innovative levels and so forth, they finally said, we need the government to move that decision diamond way to the left. And remember that program managers and VPs said they'll never do it.
Never do it.
Never
But they did.
do it. They did.
They did.
They did.
Because
They
we thought
did.
it out. We thought it out down to the day and the hour, and we had a bunch of detail and a bunch of engineers going, this is the change we need.
And a bag full of wounds that they suffered by doing it the old way.
That's right.
That's most people didn't even know about, right? So,
All right, well,
anyway,
Mike, let me ask you a deeper question here. People won't realize the political nature of some of those environments until they're in them, right? Highly politically charged. Inside of a defense supplier, up and down the supply chain of the defense supplier, we're passing drawings on to people and not communicating things like, if I had some more space, you wouldn't need an AMD you could use how much of the culture costs money? I mean, I worry, I think about this all the time. I'm like, in just people covering their ass alone, what do you think that costs? What do you think that does to the cost of shit?
oh my gosh. So people's reluctance to, well, like the Japanese, there's not a push to promote change early on. We want to see lots of cycles of learning, build some prototypes. I mean, I wish I was doing what I was doing when 3D printing was as popular as it was.
Right.
For us, we did 3D printing, but it cost us about $2,000 per module because of the equipment and so forth. This was 20 years ago.
Right.
It's a stereolithography, they called it, right?
Right.
But if I had 3D printing right now, man, I'd be putting out cycles of learning like this. I'd put it in people's hands. I'd put it in this and that. This thread design, they call it, is very powerful for an example. It's a culture change. But let me answer your question quickly. I'm going right back to that cost of change over the life cycle. You asked how much does it cost to not drive as much change as you can early on because of politics, because of, you'd have to admit you need to move the development date. You're going to piss the customer off early. All those political pressures, Dennis, cost, I'll just say 30% of the total end item lifecycle cost of any program we've done. So whatever, you got a $100 million program, I'll bet you that culture costs $30 million to that whole picture.
Wow.
I'll go out on a limb and say it's a 30% change. And I think I'm being conservative.
I think you are too.
Yeah.
I think you're
nice.
being kind and conservative. Yeah. And I think that the thing that people are like, oh, you guys are cocky or you're this or that. And I guess the thing is that we're above the politics, or we're benign. We're, exempt from the politics. I mean, I get in the Jeep and I drive away.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So every time you had us in, yeah, it was always a high pressure thing.
Let me tell you how high pressure